Hey everyone, I know they say this every week, but we have more episodes that we're working on all the time, and that means that we need more questions. So you might recognize John Ronson's name from his books, The Psychopath Test, or So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Melody recognizes him, loves him from his tremendous work on This American Life. That's where a lot of people know him from. And he has a new book coming out called The Castle. And it's about, let's put this in quotes, the unraveling of 21st century masculinity. So our question for this episode is going to be basically like, what's going on with boys and men right now? There are so many places this could go, and none of them are too weird to talk about. But just like, we're going to go more into the weird stuff and less into the like, men are sad because it's the end of patriarchy, although obviously that's part of the answer to this question. We are also doing an episode with Priya Parker on her new book about conflict. It's called The Art of Fighting. So we need your questions on fighting with people you love or people you don't, but that you want to maintain relationships with, fighting within a community, all of it. And then we're also going to have Audie Cornish back on the pod, this time with her podcast co-host, Ari Shapiro. And we're going to talk about code switching. This is something that NPR hosts or former NPR hosts obviously think about a lot. We're going to talk about how you change your voice, your posture, your demeanor, like whether you talk about reality television or not, how you talk about celebrities, whatever, depending on layered context. So please send your questions. Finally, we're going to have this super interesting episode about financial interdependence, also sometimes known as collectivist personal finance. So how can you all, everyone in your community, everyone in your family, be rich together? And obviously, we're going to define rich in different ways. We're going to rethink what financial stability looks like and how to spread it across family and communities. I can't wait for this episode, and we need your questions to make it great. So can't wait to see what all of you come up with. As always, we get so many compliments on how great our listener questions are, so please send them our way. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Kylee Van Horn, and I'm an endurance sports dietitian and owner of Fly Nutrition.
I'm Zoë Rom. I am a science journalist and communicator, as well as an elite ultra runner and a podcaster. And together, we are the hosts of the Your Diet Sucks podcast.
You're both endurance athletes. What are some of the wellness trends that are bombarding you in your feeds, or just like, I don't know, in the chats, in the discourse? Like, what are you seeing a lot of right now?
Zoe, you don't even have. Do you have social media right now?
I'm actually. Well, I've recently deleted Instagram, but I still feel like a lot of these sort of myths will find you. They're out in the ether.
100%. Yep.
I think the sort of biggest umbrella that a lot of these fit onto is the sort of idea that insert name of restrictive diet will solve all of your problems forever. It could be paleo, it could be keto, it could be low carb, it could be ancestral, it could be seed cycling, whatever it is. There's always this promise that cutting some demonized ingredient or macronutrient out of your diet is going to revolutionize your athletic training, your quality of life, your skin, all of it. And lo and behold, that almost never works. A lot of times these diets catch on because at the beginning, it feels good to be able to, people get a sense of control and agency from eliminating broad swaths of nutrients and ingredients from their diet. They might even lose a little bit of weight in the short term because they're just eating fewer calories a day. But when you look at the long-term sustainability, viability, and effectiveness of these diets, the data pretty much never supports our ability to stick to them long-term or their effectiveness long-term. So I would say the big myth is just you need to cut XYZ ingredient or nutrient out.
So diets, always a standard. Like, I just feel like at some point, I just feel like diets are going to go. I have hope. I'm like, oh, maybe we're at the end of diets. But then they just come back as like wellness, right? Like the seed, like, or like being, or figuring something out about your body. And I know that some people are legitimately gluten-free, but then other people are like, I just cut out gluten and it changed my life. what else? What other trends? Like I'm seeing
I would
still
say
so much lifting.
supplements for sure.
Supplements.
They never go away. I feel like just working on the clinical side of things, just with a lot of athletes, I'll always get people that come into working together and they'll have like a list of like 30 different supplements that they're taking.
No.
And they're like, I heard this thing on this like TikTok account, like, and I purchased this supplement and it, and it promises to do this thing. So we always have to go through and I'll be like, why are you taking that supplement? And most people for half their supplements have no idea why they're taking them, which is wild.
It reminds me of that episode of The Pit season 2 where the woman comes in and she's like bright yellow and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And it's like she started taking turmeric and like lots of people take turmeric, but she was like, what's wrong with I just like up my dose. I thought more is more, right? And just like really dangerous levels of turmeric in her body, toxicity, but I think that sometimes this is what I see in supplements. Also, I hear like a lot of women who I trust saying things like, oh, like you're not on creatine?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know there's always a new and fancy powder that you need to be adding to your smoothie or some vitamin that you need to be adding to your stack. And I think you just pointed out a logical fallacy at the heart of a lot of it is this idea that more is always better, right? Like we're in this era of everything maxing. If a little bit of vitamin C is good for your immune system, then surely a mega dose of vitamin C is even better. When lo and behold, when you look at the evidence on these things, the complicated truth is that the right amount of this substance is the right amount, and taking infinitely more increasing amounts isn't additive, and in fact can really overwhelm your kidneys and your liver because it still has to process all of these nutrients. And it's hard to sell a little bit of vitamins to a few people, right, but it's a lot easier and a lot more lucrative to sell a boatload of vitamins to everyone. And so you get this messaging that makes it seem like taking huger amounts of creatine is additionally additive, that huge amounts of acai or insert superfood here is like continually additive when there's always going to be diminishing returns. And if you don't actually have a deficiency, throwing vitamins or smoothie powders at something is kind of a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah. And the other one that I would say that I see all over the place, and I'm sure you'd both see this as well. And again, at a certain level, I'm all for it, is just like lift heavy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like that hyper specific.
Yes.
Like the hyper specificity to, it could be like changing your diet for your cycle, or you have to change your exercise routine based on your different like hormonal parts of your cycle or something like that, I feel like I get tons of hyper specific questions about that as a sports dietitian, and people want me to like give them this like hyper specific plan that they feel like they need to alter everything.
Totally. I did not know as much about the like tracking the lifting to your cycle, which we have a whole question about this, so we'll talk about that later. But Zoe, you pitched the idea for this episode, which is going to be very far reaching, which is basically like the women's sports industrial diet complex. Why do you feel like, I mean, your whole podcast is in some ways about this, but why do you feel like this is something that is really important for us to address directly?
I think that this came from a good bit of curiosity sort of in my own life. I'm an elite athlete, and there's increasing buzz online about emerging science, particularly looking at female athletes, which is great and exciting, particularly given that women have been historically disenfranchised both by medicine and by science. So there's sort of this void that's opened up by the fact that medicine, science, particularly exercise science, which is kind of a young and squirrely field that's, it's young in its own right, and particularly there's a huge lack of research that pertains specifically to female athletes. And so you get this big information vacuum. And into this information vacuum floods an entire cottage industry of influencers and would-be science communicators who are using this information vacuum and I think a really positive desire on behalf of women to invest more in their health, in exercise, in movement. So I think there's a lot of positives here, but there's a lot of, it's at my most cynical, bad actors or maybe just naive or ill-informed actors who sort of flood this zone with super specific information where their prescriptions get way out over the skis of what the evidence would suggest actually makes sense given what we have. So I think that there's sort of also this dynamic where because there has historically not been a ton of research on women, what very little research we do have, people are reluctant to caveat and to critique. And particularly because women have been so underrepresented, not just in the research, but as researchers and as communicators, it feels bad to critique a lot of the women who are the loudest in this space because a lot of people want to feel seen and heard and like their experience and how they feel is being validated by the science and the medicine. And so oftentimes the first people to validate that impulse of like, man, I feel like a lot of the prescriptions that are based on research done on men, I don't feel like that works for me, or I don't feel like it includes my perspective as someone navigating menopause or someone navigating the menstrual cycle. And then you sort of have this dynamic where the loudest voices are not always the ones that are the most evidence-based. And it creates this place where the narratives that sort of end up being the stickiest are the ones that are a bit more emotionally satisfying than scientifically satisfying.
Totally. And like there's so much gray area. And I see this all over the place with people talking about hormone replacement therapy, which we can talk about later. But Kylee, one thing that I've noticed, like I see a ton of this oriented towards perimenopausal and menopausal women because of my age. But is this also directed towards athletes in their teens and 20s and early 30s?
Oh yeah, I would say definitely for sure. And it often is based around the cycle, cycle syncing and changing up your nutrition to try to match the part of your cycle you're in. And I think Zoe sort of alluded to it, but another thing that I see is like there can be some shreds of research and there might be actually communicated by certain experts in the space, but the expert too might have financial interest or like want to sell things. And so I think a lot of these products and recommendations are developed to kind of sell certain female-oriented products or protocols for people to follow so that other people can make money.
Yeah. Well, and this is the thundercloud over our entire conversation, which is that when we feel uncertain about something in our like particularly capitalist society, we try to buy things that will fix it.
Yes. And just, the biological sort of chapters that female athletes are navigating, like whether they're young women, whether it's the menstrual cycle, reproduction, pregnancy and postpartum, and then peri and menopause, every single one of those life stages introduces a whole new opportunity to create and then pitch into a totally manufactured insecurity. So a lot of these things, they might sort of be complicating variables when it comes to doing research, though even that I think is merits its own degree of skepticism. But what it certainly does is open up an incredibly rich market to sell things into, because with every life stage comes body changes, and we've been cultured from the time we were very, very young to resist any change, right? Like if the marketing were to be believed, we should want to be stuck in amber as our 18-year-old selves, which thank God that we age.
Oh my God.
Right?
Oh
but
my
we're
God.
taught to fear this. We're taught to resist it. And at every life stage that introduces a change, that introduces insecurity, instability, that creates a really rich marketing opportunity.
I had a dermatologist tell me when I was in my late 20s, And it was the first time as an adult that I had really ever figured out my skin. Like I was super acne prone as a kid, like just really dealt with it throughout my 20s, figured it out, at least like felt calm. My skin felt calm. And she said, every decade of your adult life, your skin will change and you'll have to figure it out again. And it was
God.
like
nightmare.
and totally, I was
I
like,
just want one serum
"What?"
for life, you know?
Yes.
One face mask, that's it.
It was just so discouraging. And I was like, really? I have to do this again and again and again? And I feel like men don't have to do that. Is that true?
No, right? Like they're just like, whatever, sir, you're gorgeous. Love it. Grow a beard if we're feeling weird about it.
I know, totally. The Culture City podcast is sponsored by OneSkin. OneSkin is nothing like your typical skincare brand. Most anti-aging skincare is built to react to smooth over lines and wrinkles after they show up. OneSkin started somewhere different, working to address how skin ages in the first place. The longevity scientists at OneSkin studied skin at the cellular level and found that visible skin aging starts deeper, when certain cells stop working the way they should and begin affecting the healthy cells around them. So they engineered OS1, their proprietary peptide, to work with skin's biology, targeting those dysfunctional cells instead of just sitting on the surface. It's the foundation of every product they make, and what you see over time with their products is firmer, smoother skin, more even tone and radiance, and visibly fewer fine lines for skin that both looks and acts younger. I use OneSkin every day. I use their moisturizer, I use their under eye cream, and I use their sunscreen, which I love. It doesn't separate in the bottle, which is something that I've had with tinted moisturizers and sunscreens in the past, is that feeling when it, like, even after you shake it, it comes out like on your finger, and it's just kind of like there's like a little bit of oil that's going one direction, and you're like, oh no, that's going to get in the sink. It looks disgusting. That does not happen. It never separates. I really, really like that. And now I'm getting all my friends hooked on it too. Born from 10 years of longevity research, OneSkin is helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. For a limited time, try OneSkin with 15% off using code CULTURE at oneskin.co/culture. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code CULTURE. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you. Today's episode is sponsored by ZBiotics. So, Melody, can you drink beer the same way that you did when you were 20?
No. You know what? I just reread something that I wrote in 2015, and I mentioned going on a date and drinking 5 beers. If I did that today, I would be under the table. Right? I mean, I had 2 glasses of rosé the other night, and I was like, whew.
Yeah, that's the thing. We are not, people yell at us when we say that we're old. We're not, like, we are older than we used to be. And as people who are older than we used to be, we just don't bounce back the same way that we used to. So sometimes you get like this tension of like, do I want to have 2 glasses of rosé and hang out with my friends? Like, and I want that second. It's not like you're being peer pressured. No one's like telling you to drink the second glass. Like, you want it. It sounds good. It tastes good. But then you're like, oh, am I gonna like not feel great the next day? This is where pre-alcohol comes in handy. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was engineered by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut, and it's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Pre-alcohol works overnight so that you can have 2 glasses of rosé and still show up sharp the next day. So go to zbiotics.com/culturestudy and use code culturestudy for 15% off. Okay, so I want to get into the questions. We said before we started taping that we got so many good questions that like we might need to do a second episode on this. If you would like that, please tell us in the comments. So we're going to talk about wellness marketing towards women, where it comes from, whether it holds up. And we're going to start with big picture questions and then look at a few specific trends and then end with another big picture question. So let's start with this question from Shay.
How should we parse the difference between what I would think is a very true lack of peer-reviewed gold standard research into women's health issues, including how all health issues specifically affect women, and the ways in which women's health companies take advantage of that to pinkwash their products? How do we know what is real versus what is propaganda? What are some good ways to identify real information when it's all tied to product delivery and capitalism?
So we were kind of talking about this already, but
Yeah.
Kylie, do you want to start with this one?
I mean, I guess we can start with maybe little identifiers of what, like, how we can help people maybe identify that they're being marketed to, or there are certain things that are being extrapolated and claims being made to try and sell you something.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would be a good kind of spot. I feel like whenever we are, like, in our podcast episodes, we always talk about language and how there's certain, like, extreme forms of language that can be used whenever people are maybe talking about a specific thing on social media. They'll use really big words like hack your whatever, or they might say like
Boost,
maximize, boost. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, like, extreme sorts of words that cover, but if you think about it, they either like offer a quick fix or they are like really broad.
Right.
And so they're taking like a shred of a small study and then they're extrapolating it and making it try to apply to this like larger swath of people. And usually when you start hearing those bigger claims, that's where you need to put on your thinking cap and actually try to get some try to think about some nuance. And I think the nuance piece, I think, is really difficult because when we look at what's being communicated on social media or in media in general, a lot of times people like to hear a simple answer. And unfortunately, the research on female athletes or people just engaging in fitness is not huge. And so a lot of times, like, the media presence will play on this idea and try to make it seem like there is more out there than there actually is. So they give a simple answer instead of providing the nuance. And then, you know, we had chatted a little bit about like creatine or something. It's tough because people will hear like, oh, I think I need to be taking this for, you know, perimenopause or postmenopause, so I'm just going to do it, versus taking into account their situation, the nuances that might occur in their situation, and whether they actually need that thing as part of their routine.
Right. Like not identifying that there were, I mean, this is the key to advertising, right? You don't realize there's a problem until the advertising tells you that you're having a problem and that their product will fix it. And so if it's not something that you have already identified as a problem in your training, in your life, in the way that you feel in your body, like, is this what, like, do you need this thing? Zoe, what would you add here?
Yeah, I would say one of the big issues is that when you're working with this data set, which is a really limited data set, right? Like, there was a big meta-analysis that came out a few years ago that looked at over 5,000 publications with over 12 million different research participants from 6 of the largest exercise science journals. And it found that only 63% of the publications included participants of both sexes. 30% were men only, and 6% was females only. So that 6% is a pretty measly number, and it doesn't leave us a ton of data to work with. So a lot of times into that vacuum, it sort of makes things unfalsifiable, because when you have no data, no solid data, it makes it hard to prove people wrong. So you have this dynamic where claiming that science ignored women is both true, but a lot of times brands, social media influencers, marketing copy will try to use that as like a permanent liability shield. And it will again try to give a lot of the prescriptions, products, and protocols this sort of veneer of pseudo-feminism of like, yes, queen, finally there's a multivitamin for you.
Right.
And a lot of times when you look at these claims, if they get more specific, a lot of times the like actual science is pretty clear about the limitations of use cases, where if you're trying to move product, all of your incentives are to widen the lens on how many people and in what use cases might benefit from your product. I also think it's really helpful to look at the product if there is an actual outcome that you can measure its effectiveness. A lot of times things like feel better, have more energy are things that make it really challenging to check any kind of actual claim against. I also think it's worth asking yourself what would falsify the claim. So often people end up taking a bunch of supplements or engaging in these protocols because they haven't set up, like, sort of set guardrails for themselves ahead of time of what would make me think this is no longer worth pursuing. And a lot of times folks can fall either into the sunk cost fallacy or this idea of like, well, what's the harm? I might as well keep doing CrossFit, or I might as well keep taking 30 supplements a day. So I think a lot of times it comes down to, like Kylee said, assessing if it's really a use case for you specifically, and understanding that while we maybe don't have as rich a body of research as we might prefer to make these decisions on, female athletes are not a totally different species from males. And so there are some things that transfer. That doesn't mean we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater and totally disregard any science that is based on males, because there are some things that carry over. And so I think that you should be really suspicious whenever people point to that vacuum as the sole means of their earned authority.
One thing that I think a lot about is that, especially for people who are, let's say, like, this is not their job, right? They're not professionals. They are just like running on the side or doing triathlons on the side or whatever. Like, and it's, they think of it as a hobby. Ultimately, my doctor is not going to have any advice for me about creatine, about fueling, about these things, right? She, like, unless I'm going to a doctor who is also an athlete, who would actually just tell me, like, as a friend, not as like a medical professional mostly, right? And because it's my hobby, it would be difficult to get a referral to, like, you know, someone like you, Kylee, and have my insurance cover it. And so most people are operating in this, like, this amateur knowledge vacuum, right? Where, like, especially if they don't know how to find scientific papers or know how to read scientific papers, which are not always the easiest to parse. So I think we're in this place of, like, where do we find this? And also I think a lot of health magazines or, like, places that used to do a little bit more of this science communication are either gone or ruled by affiliate links. So
Yes.
Well, and I think part of the challenge too is people are looking for answers, specifically like perimenopausal, postmenopausal females. That's like one of the biggest groups of people that reach out to me for help.
Yeah.
They want an answer and they feel like the healthcare system is not able to provide that for them. And so they feel kind of like lost, left behind, and just grasping for, they want an answer. And if there's a simple answer, then they're like, okay, great, I'm going to do that and that and that and that.
Right. And it's like, so everything else in my life is chaos. So maybe this one thing will actually be simple.
Yeah. I can kind of like relate to that kind of being like getting into the perimenopausal age group myself. It's kind of like, oh, like I really want more information and answers too. And so I understand how we can all, you know, be susceptible to wanting to kind of have something that we can grasp onto that is going to maybe help us.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times borrowing practices from elite athletes, and this is a kind of funny thing that we see when you really look at the marketing of how a lot of health and wellness trends are marketed at men versus women. Because for men, you would think that every single person is a former Army operative who's training for the Super Bowl by how they're marketed to, because the emphasis on performance and objectives and outcomes and data is that of borrowing the authority from pro athletes.
Right.
With women, it's so much more softer and squishier, and it's about glowing from within and a sort of ephemeral vitality a la Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah.
But I think that there's actually a way in which, like, treating yourself like an elite athlete, even if you're just a workaday gal who goes to the gym, in terms of eating enough, sleeping enough, treating yourself well, and advocating for yourself with medical professionals. If something hurts or you're struggling with fatigue, demand to be taken seriously like an elite athlete would, even if you're just kind of a regular gal off the street. I think where that advice breaks down and where we should be careful is when people use the credibility of athletes to sell products, right? Like so often folks will use that appeal to authority to say like, well, if Michaela Schifrin uses this greens powder, then I, a lady who goes on a brisk walk 4 times a week, must also need that to optimize my aerobic training, when in fact, yeah, maybe just spend a little extra time in the vegetable aisle at the grocery store. But I think, there's a world where telling women to advocate for themselves as if they're an elite athlete is a net benefit. And even if that means that some of the other folks might chill out and not wholesale adopt all of Tom Brady's wellness practices.
I think this is especially difficult for women who don't look like the idealized, like, slim athlete lady, right? I just know people who've gone into the doctor wanting help with, like, a particular problem or, like, something to do with sleep or something to do with stuff that is perimenopause. And, like, the recommendation is just, like, a flat lose weight, right?
Yeah.
And I can see how that would be incredibly frustrating and demoralizing, and you would turn away from that, right?
Well, a lot of women get gaslit at the physician's office, unfortunately. Like,
yes,
just from experience working with people, again, they'll come to me because they're like, well, my doctor is not giving me answers and I feel like I'm being gaslit. And so what should I do? And I'm like, I'm not a doctor, so I can't necessarily, like, I have scope of practice as well. And so that makes it difficult too. And I have to help women oftentimes, like, advocate for themselves and try to find maybe another professional that might be able to help them. But like, a lot of people lose steam and they feel really defeated because of those kinds of experiences that they have at a medical establishment.
And, I won't name names, but like the online sites where you can sign up and basically, like, they'll just blanket prescribe a GLP-1 or HRT to you. And my doctor was actually criticizing these places. And I was like, listen, the reason women are going to these places in particular is because they are not getting specific perimenopausal and menopausal care. And the recommendation, right, is to, like, look up someone in your area who is specifically trained, as so few doctors are, in menopausal care. And I looked on, like, I went to the directory. There's an official directory. There is one provider in my city, which is like a mid-sized city, and she doesn't take insurance. That's how in demand she is. She doesn't take insurance, right? And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I go online if I'm not getting the care that I can't get into a GP. I can't find this care. Like, I'll just, like, take my own care into my own hands, which is risky. It's not great.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's crazy that we treat something that if demographics were to be believed, over half of Americans will experience menopause. But the way the medical establishment treats it as if it's some, like, rare mosquito-borne disease from, like, sub-Saharan Africa.
Like, how dare you specialize in that?
How dare you specialize, again, in a thing that the majority of our fellow
Yes, the actual majority
will go through at some point in their lives. And it's not at all, like, a core part of a lot of medical curriculums. And I think that particularly when you look at the incentives of the for-profit healthcare industry, the thing about, particularly a lot of the concerns of people who are experiencing menopause and perimenopause, postmenopause are squishy. It will involve spending a lot of time in a room with a human, asking them tough questions that may or may not make you any money down the line. And so the entire incentive structure, this entire system that we've built up is basically tailor-made to underserve half the population and sort of in some ways overly pathologize a very normal part of life and also underserve the very real quality of life concerns that come along with it.
Yeah. Okay, I could talk about this literally for another hour, so maybe that's our next one. But I want to talk about cardio. This question's from Molly.
What's up with all the hate towards cardio? It seems like recently everyone is telling women to lift heavy and avoid cardio because it spikes your cortisol, which is a vast oversimplification of the actual science of how exercise impacts cortisol production. In addition, cardio has a host of other benefits that are great for people of all genders. Where did this sudden hate for cardio come from? Why is it only women who are being discouraged from running, biking, etc., and not men? Is it trending because it's popular with people who hate cardio and are glad to have an excuse to skip it? Or is it because women are tired of being told to solely work out in a way that's designed to make you skinnier? Would love to hear your thoughts.
I know the anti-stair-stepper lobby must be strong right now.
Totally.
I mean, in some ways it's good, right? Like historically, women haven't been told that it's a good idea for them to pick heavy things up and to focus on exercise rather than making themselves smaller, but to do it to increase their function, quality of life, or even strength. Like if you want to lift heavy and get big muscles, rock on. That's amazing. However, like she said, this does sort of get to the core of a real big oversimplification, which is sort of our cultural misunderstanding of cortisol, a stress hormone, and this idea that this thing is sort of a boogeyman, that it's always inherently bad and scary, and that we want to tamp down on it. I think we see a pretty similar sort of narrative happen with inflammation. Everyone's trying to minimize their inflammation.
What is inflammation?
What is it? Yes. They're these sort of like specters that loom over being human right now of like, we're all inflamed, we have cortisol.
Yes.
It's terrible. But importantly, inflammation is a part of the adaptation process. Cortisol is a part of the adaptation process. And while it's true that you don't want to be constantly flooded with cortisol all the time, which essentially would be Cushing's syndrome, which is like a real medical issue, which is rare, but does exist. People have been taught to fear any amount of cortisol for any reason, but we need cortisol. Our body produces cortisol in the morning to sort of help us get up and get at it and counteract the sort of chemical state of being asleep. And so people have been taught to fear cortisol. And a lot of it also, again, sort of does go back to this fear of gaining weight. This idea that if you experience any amount of cortisol production in your body for any reason, it is going to make you gain weight. And there is a relationship between cortisol and weight gain. But when you look at cortisol, that again is reproduced as a necessary and not always detrimental byproduct of exercise. Like exercise is stress. That's part of what makes it worth doing because it stresses your body in a way that it's then able to adapt to. So it's sort of this, tried and true tale of casting one single like body system, chemical idea, macronutrient or ingredient as always bad, even if there might be sort of a mechanistic underpinning of like, again, cortisol's not always good either. It just really, really oversimplifies it and again teaches women to be scared of one single outcome of their body. I think that honestly, this is sort of just the Instagram version of the idea that running a marathon will make your uterus drop out. It just has like a little more sciencey veneer to it.
I just want to call out what I see as like the fundamental fat phobia in so much of this kind of fear mongering, right? It's like, what if you exercise and you gain weight?
Yes. Yeah.
like what a waste it would be, right? Like, it's just like it is. And you can't say anymore, or it's not like, I think, appropriate in many spheres to say like, oh, and then you'll gain weight, and that's the fucking worst, right? But it's there. It's always there. This fear, I think, that's very internalized, especially amongst like people who are very into fitness, that something will like add extra weight. I'm putting that in quotes.
Well, and it's also for people that aren't happy with their body, like if you do happen to change your body composition as you get older, I mean, who would think that would happen? Then that is where people start searching for these solutions, and then they hear, oh, cardio is contributing to this, and you need to lift heavy, and that needs to be your focus so that your body composition can go back to it the way it was when you were 20 years old. Then they're like, all right, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
And then the other thing that I don't think you mentioned, Zoe, but like a lot of times, again, the supplement industry is built off of this idea if you like take something like cortisol and amplify how bad it is, then we can create a supplement that can help balance out your cortisol. So that's another like component of the whole like cortisol thing. I know it's not directly related to the cardio versus strength, but this idea also comes into the whole equation, I feel like.
And I think it's particularly instructive when you look at how social media and the attention economy works, because it's like perfectly tailor-made to go viral of this thing you thought was good for you is actually bad for you, which is an extremely catchy way to start any kind of social media communication. And again, just functions on the assumption that the only reason a woman would ever want to exercise is to modify how her body looks, which is not that is a reason that many people come to exercise, but is, again, I think a pretty flawed assumption that I would love to see our culture attach to exercise, movement, and fitness. And I think that consistently training women, they need to be hyper vigilant about the ways that everything they do, every choice they make impacts how their body looks. We just have better things to do with our time and energy than being worried if lifting weights, in addition to make us strong, might accidentally make us look slightly less like an early 90s Victoria's Secret model.
Or like the weight thing. Oh my gosh, I went to an Airbnb the other day that had a scale in it.
Oh my God.
Like, oh, how rude. Like,
that's disturbing because they went out of their way to go to Target and to purchase this thing and to put it in their Airbnb.
I was so mad. And it was the Airbnb that we were staying in during a Ragnar relay race. Like, so it was 12 women stayed in this Airbnb. And we're like, you know, like we're running through the night, we're sleeping, we're bloated, we're eating so much food, we're having so much fun, type B fun. And like, here's the scale just being like, oh, well, you think you're having fun? I was so mad. Okay, we got so many questions about periods and fitness, and we talked briefly about this before, but I want to read 2 questions and then we'll talk a lot more. This first one comes from Britt.
What is up with fitness influencers and period culture? I see tons of posts with all this messaging about not lifting heavy during your luteal phase, or you're really tired during X phase, so you should rest. I'll disclose that I'm very skeptical about all this, so I probably just said the wrong phase. But is this actually based on anything? Do period cycles actually cause that big of differences in the bodies of people with uteruses to make a difference in fitness training? Or is this just another way for influencers to grift and a new way for us to both police our bodies and I'm just a girl our way out of fitness spaces prematurely?
And then here's Audrey.
I know the idea of building your workout routine around your menstrual cycle is trendy right now, but why do I keep seeing Instagram posts from Planned Parenthood encouraging it? I know they're trying to engage with young people, but from what I've seen, there's no scientific merit to the idea, and it's mostly being peddled by influencers to sell supplements. What gives?
All right, what do we know? What do we know about menstrual cycles and fitness?
Well, what we know is that women as individuals will feel all different kinds of ways throughout the menstrual cycle, but you can't scale that up to breaking news. Shocking, I know, to everyone listening, but you can't scale that up to the population level. There is no one way everyone feels during the luteal phase. There is no one response to how, anyone will respond to a certain workout stimulus on any one part of their menstrual cycle. There will be a huge gap between how any 2 women feel. But that, unfortunately, is going to do a very poor job at selling supplements or selling exercise protocols and meal plans. Right. And again, I think this becomes so sticky because for so long, women have felt ignored and they've kind of been told, like, don't worry about it, sweetheart. Just like suck it up and get back out there on the court and ignore how you're feeling. And that's also not true either. That logic breaks down on the individual level. So the messy truth is that you should be aware of how you feel, but there's no population level prescription that we can give people. You might feel great lifting heavy on your luteal phase, and that is awesome. However, you're going to have a really hard time sustaining a practice long term if you're always trying to match people up with like these super specific workout prescriptions. And I think, it falls into this idea of hormonal determinism where something that was sort of originally meant to be empowering of like, look, ladies, we did a science for you. Isn't this great? But it sort of becomes this way of forecasting how you will or won't feel. And so you'll have women hold themselves back in competition, or they might do more than they should when they should really rest, or they might rest when they feel good. And then when the prescription fails them, they'll blame themselves rather than the shoddy science it was built on. Because the fascinating thing, when you really look at the studies that a lot of this is based on, the women are self-reporting where they are in their menstrual cycle. And if you know anything about self-reported menstrual cycle data, or if anyone else out there is not a total maniac about tracking their cycle, you know that we can often be quite wrong. And when you compare self-reported cycle data versus like an actual hormonal assay, which is super expensive and is not like a standard part of protocol, like scientists are not actually looking at where people are in their menstrual cycle. They're asking, where do you think you are? The gap between those two things ends up being so big that so much, like 90.99% of the do this on your cycle stuff falls apart under the least amount of scrutiny.
Kylee, what do you say when people say, like, ask you these questions?
There is actually a shred of truth to, like, there can be different rates of metabolism for things like caffeine in the second half of your cycle, or your resting metabolic rate can be elevated in the second half of your cycle. So essentially, when hormones change, yes, that can impact our ability to break down certain foods or oxidize fats, etc. I think the challenge comes in when people try to get hyper specific with that, and they don't even have the foundations dialed in, So they're like, I want to develop my nutrition plan to go along with my cycle, but yet they're not even eating enough protein. They don't even understand like their different carbohydrate needs for different types of training days. And it's like, these are bigger components to your overall nutrition that we know. We have a lot more data and evidence stating that they're going to have a huge performance benefit or just even a health benefit,
right?
Than trying to adjust your nutrition plan in different phases of your cycle. And so that's where a lot of people, then they get frustrated because they don't want it. Unfortunately, it's harder sometimes to do the basic things. And people get really sick of us talking about that on our podcast, I think. But the reality is that's the work that needs to be done first.
You're never going to go viral telling people to get 8 hours of sleep and to eat 3 meals a day and to manage their stress and to plug themselves into a community. But you can absolutely go viral telling people they need to take 10 milligrams of fish oil on the third full moon of their 9th lunar cycle. And so you sort of get these hyper-specific prescriptions because they feel true and they feel sciencey, even when they really just aren't. And again, I think it always comes down to asking, like, do you have those foundations dialed in? Was the research done on a population that matters for you? And like, again, what are the actual consequences here? Because so often it sort of gives people this really narrow sort of silver bullet or this hack of like, if I can just optimize my cranberry intake one day of the month, that feels a lot more attainable to some women than let me like try to have a manageable workload, good work-life balance, adequate childcare, and access to health resources.
Right.
I think a lot of this comes from looking at diet culture itself, because people... a lot of people have a really lengthy diet history, and they've done a lot of, whether it's Weight Watchers or some kind of like extreme like keto thing, they've tried all the different diets. And so they're like, well, I haven't tried specifically trying to change my diet for my cycle. So they want that as an answer too, because they're still frustrated. Usually it's because of weight and body composition. I would say like the majority of time that I chat with people, it's a dissatisfaction with their body image.
Yeah. I was just going to say that like the voice of Virginia Soul-Smith, friend of the pod, is just in my ear through this entire conversation being like, that's restriction. Like when people are trying to do this isn't like, this is an act of restriction. It is a diet. And like, it is a way of funneling that energy in a way that you feel like is not as like diet culture-y, but it's still restriction and probably results in all sorts of other behaviors as a result.
Yeah, we see this a lot with like a lot of diet culture for men has just been rebranded as biohacking, and it puts on a little science hat, and it sort of becomes this culturally sanctioned practice of, oh no, it's totally cool that he's only eating one meal a day because he's biohacking. Whereas if a woman did it, we have the cultural awareness to go like, oh sweetie,
that's an
not
eating
okay.
disorder.
Yeah, and so this sort of becomes this way of, again, laundering diet culture through this veneer of science to make it a bit more palatable either to the culture or maybe even make it a little more palatable to ourselves, because we all know as like delightful 21st century feminists, we shouldn't be trying to lose weight, and like we're so over diet culture and we're too smart for that. And so we know to ascribe, even maybe just subconsciously, a different and more acceptable and modern vocabulary to what is a very old practice.
Right. And I see this too with some people who have struggled with orthorexia, which is essentially like exercising as a means of weight control. And like I definitely struggled with this in my 20s, like as just like exercising all the time. Like that is your restriction. You're like, I'm not going to diet. I'm just going to exercise all the time. And that's strength, right? Or that's like, that's me being a feminist, or that's me trying to live out my feminist ideals. And it's just, for me, it comes back to this idea of like, I want to control my body in order to make it more societally palatable.
Yeah, it's the same stuff with just like a slightly updated costume every single time. Like all of these ideas are sort of parasitic, and they can latch onto whatever the cultural zeitgeist is. Now that we're, again, all empowered women trying to be healthy and strong, again, you can use those words to describe practices that are anything but empowering and anything but healthy. And the challenge is because we are in this context of needing to have a larger national conversation about health and well-being and about folks' access to healthy and nourishing foods, it allows a certain part of the population to really go overboard with things like clean eating and exercise, because to the culture at large, someone who is exercising constantly and only eating pure, healthy, clean foods, that might look very virtuous. That might look extremely healthy. But, you know, this person is unable to go to birthday parties, cannot go out to eat at a restaurant, and feels totally out of control the second they don't get to eat out of their little bento box of what makes this okay. And I think that you can't know what's going on from what things look like on the outside. They may look healthy on the surface, but it always comes down to getting curious of like, how does this function inside the person? Because 9 times out of 10, it's a means for control, and it's a means for sort of making the female body particularly compliant.
The Culture Study Podcast gets support from Article. So we're doing this thread this week on buy it for life or buy it for near life. And it's hard to get furniture these days that is buy it for life, unless you've inherited it from like your great grandmother or something like that, right? But the closest I've come in my adult life in terms of stuff that I have actually kept around is stuff from Article. Don't you think, Melody?
Oh, absolutely.
So what do you have right now that feels like a long time for your adult life?
I'm really still loving the entryway console thing that we got for our entryway. It's narrow, so it doesn't take up the whole hallway, but it has 4 drawers, and so we stick stuff in there that like we would grab on the way out of the house, like dog poop bags or like a small towel for when Polly gets muddy after a walk. And it's also the landing spot for all of our mail. This thing gets a lot of use, and it still looks brand new.
Article makes it effortless to create a stylish, long-lasting home at an unbeatable price. They come in all different styles, and it just works well with other things existing in my home. I don't know how they do this. Like, it just does. And then it also pairs seamlessly with other stuff from the larger Article collection without being too matchy-matchy. You can immediately tell the difference in quality when you receive an Article piece. Article offers fast, affordable shipping across the US and Canada with options for professional assembly if you prefer a hands-off experience. And with Article's 30-day satisfaction guarantee, you can shop with confidence knowing that if you're not completely in love with your new furniture, you can easily return it. Article is offering our listeners $50 off their first purchase of $100 or more. So to claim it, just go to article.com/culture and the discount will be automatically applied at checkout. That's article.com/culture for $50 off your first purchase of $100 or more. Today's episode is sponsored by ZocDoc. So my friend's kid's doctor just retired. And she was just totally stressing out. Like, I don't have time to figure out, like, who takes our insurance? Like, do people like this person? Are they in, like, proximity to my house? What are the hours? All of that sort of thing. And she was telling me about that. And I was like, let's just get on ZocDoc and, like, we'll put in your insurance information. We'll put in where you live. She lives in Seattle, so this is really straightforward. Immediately found a ton of suggestions very nearby. And there were all sorts of reviews too. So she could see like, oh, this person is really warm with kids, all that sort of thing. ZocDoc is so simple to use. It lets you search and compare local in-network doctors. They have more than 150,000 providers listed within 200 plus specialties across all 50 states. ZocDoc's website also has tons of reviews from real patients and detailed doctor profiles to help you choose the right fit for you. You can see actual appointment openings and click to instantly book a visit, which is great when you or your kids are already sick and you need an appointment as soon as possible. And appointments also happen fast, usually within 24 to 72 hours. You can even sometimes score same-day appointments. Best of all, ZocDoc is totally free to use. Your health matters and taking care of yourself shouldn't be complicated. Find and book the right doctor with ZocDoc. Head to ZocDoc.com/culture to get started and check that appointment off your to-do list. That's ZocDoc.com/culture. Let's talk about Pilates. This person wants to remain anonymous, so Melody is going to read the question.
I'm struggling with the rise of the does Pilates every day archetype of femininity and want to unpack why it feels so uncomfortable. I generally see strength and fitness as empowering for women and believe the best exercise is the one you genuinely enjoy and will stick with. I've done Pilates regularly in the past and still love it for core strength and stability, but there seems to be a growing culture around daily Pilates, specifically for women, especially expensive studio memberships that seem to require so much time and money that they crowd out other forms of movement. At the same time, male comments like, if your girl goes to Pilates, wife her up, are increasingly trending on social media, which turns Pilates from a health activity into a marker of desirability. It starts to feel less about fitness and more about signaling a specific ideal: thin, toned, affluent, conventionally feminine, and often white. Another way to control unruly female bodies. God forbid a woman get bulky while getting strong. How can women who genuinely love Pilates reclaim it as an empowering form of exercise when it's increasingly tied to the male gaze, class hierarchy, and a narrow vision of femininity, one that celebrates being strong and fit, but only if you're also small, polished, and wife material? Help.
This is a classic culture study question in that it like kind of answers its own question in the question, like, and leads us in so many different directions. So who wants to start?
I think, for me, I'm always interested in when these things become a means of communicating identity, because that is fully where it leaves the science and the utility behind and just becomes a cultural signifier. And that's when a lot of these things really escape containment and get harder to sort of pin down what we're actually talking about. Because I think a lot of times when a practice like Pilates becomes legible primarily as a signal, the cost shifts from physical to financial, which is something I think it's always useful to keep our eyes trained on. A lot of these things have really small class caps, super expensive equipment, and the exclusivity and the sort of hard to attain of it all becomes the model. And I think the daily of it too is really important because I sort of feel like it's this way where female exercise culture is sort of starting to bridge closer to what men have also sort of had foisted upon them of making sure that every moment of our lives is spent, again, just being ultimately or as compliant as possible and as productive as possible. And all the better if you're being compliant and productive in a way that satisfies the the cultural idea of what it means to be feminine, which is like, of course, you are extremely healthy and you're extremely strong, but you need to be healthy and strong in the ways that we've been taught to view as healthy and strong in a woman, aka you should look like a ballerina in her late teens, kind of always. And so I think the like useful questions that I use sort of going into these, I'm going to do a very journalism thing and I'm going to answer this question with an assay of my own questions. But does this practice survive things that the gaze doesn't reward? Like, would you do it if the body modification was taken out of the equation? And I think another sort of quick diagnostic question I like to run in instances like these is, does the marketing of the thing, the way the studio or the way the culture is contextualizing it, does it describe what you'll be able to do? Does it describe a change in function, or does it describe an aesthetic change? And in most of these instances, it's that ballerina body that we're all trying to aim for, despite the fact that very few of us are going to be in Swan Lake anytime soon. And then, you know, again, just like the physiology of it all. As an athlete, we are trained according to progressive overload, which means that you should be doing more over time in order to progress your results. In the case of Pilates, if the work never gets harder, what you're doing is you're maintaining a compliant appearance rather than training yourself to be increasingly functional. I think it's also fine to love things that are kind of culturally might have a bit of meh to them. If you really like the thing and you're aware of the machinery around it, I think those two things are compatible. I think it's when you start to outsource what you like to the machinery itself that things start to become a problem.
I also see this with CrossFit, you know. I feel like it's similar.
It's just Pilates for guys.
But even there are some women that do CrossFit, and I think some of it too, we did an episode about cults, and I feel like it almost gets into this, like, people want to become a member of this community, but then it turns into a cult, and then it's like this weird relationship almost, you know.
Well, and there's often a lot of like sexual stuff going on, specifically in CrossFit, because it is more mixed gender. But I also think like part of what attracts people to these classes, to these studios, is it is a form of community that is often not accessible in other forms. Especially if you have a life that is so packed that like, okay, but I have to also optimize my exercise by going to, my friend calls the specific sort of Pilates that's become very popular. She's in Seattle. She calls it mean Pilates. Like
what is
it's
that?
basically like, it's just like, it's like Pilates gulp, like, you know, it's not like they're not on the machines, but it's just like and it's not like the Pilates class that I took at the YMCA in 2009, right? It's very like what this person is talking about in terms of Pilates.
I think the community aspect is positive. The sort of caveat I would have there is, again, particularly women are socialized to build community around discontent surrounding our bodies.
Totally.
Like, this idea of normative discontent has been studied, that women will basically use as a connection ritual, like, I feel so fat, or XYZ negative comment about my body. And that's literally how women, like, it's been studied again and again that is how women bond. So I think if you're going to the gym and it is a empowering and positive thing that you and your gal pals or pals of any gender are doing to take care of yourselves, that's awesome. And so far that your group's whole thing doesn't become we hate ourselves and therefore we need to modify ourselves and have the entirety of our social lives rotate around trying to change how we physically show up in the world, I think things get a little bit muddy there.
Yeah. You're not like going out to coffee afterwards and being like, I'm so bad for eating this.
I'm so bad.
That too. And the other thing I'll say is that I got really into hot yoga in the late 2000s when, you know, like the time. And I went every day, in part, like I was in grad school then, and there was like a great student discount to like unlimited memberships. They get you with the unlimited membership, right? It was $99 a month. It was like the biggest luxury that I ever experienced. This is in Austin, Texas. Like, can you imagine what an unlimited hot yoga membership would be now?
In this economy? Oh my God.
And it really did become like the routineness for me was incredibly useful as like a stress relief, as a a place to go that even though it was heated, it was still like not as hot as outside. This is an awesome. So funny. As a place where I saw people who were not in my grad program. And the thing that became unhealthy about it was not actually anything to do with my body. Like my body felt strong. I loved like seeing what it could do. And also it kind of cured me of my previous cardio addiction. It's that it became an MLM. Like I was constantly being recruited into like, oh, you're good at yoga. Then the next step is obviously go to these teacher trainings, right? And that to me, like, I think that's another thing to be wary of, and that's the cult component as well. Is like, how do these become profit centers? By exploiting your desire to both discipline your body and also be like really good at something.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Is there anything else? Like, I think the desirability thing, like, why don't some men do go to Pilates, but like, why is this coded as something that like is such like a hot rich lady thing?
Yeah, which is so funny. This is one of the few instances, like when you actually look at the fascinating history of Pilates, which was invented by a man in a concentration camp, a totally wild place for an exercise craze to begin, by the way, which will definitely change any Pilates class that you go to after this. What is fascinating is this is one of the few trends that started as pretty male-coded and then jumped ship. I think, again, sort of looking at the boxes that it ticks, like so often exercise and health trends that are marketed to women sort of open up a problem in the realm of particularly feminine insecurities, or like ways that you personally are failing as a woman, whether it's like usually it's the size and shape of your body. And it's sort of the way for exercise culture to have its cake and eat it too when it comes to shaming women, because obviously you need to be exercising constantly, and that should be like the underpinning of your entire life. But also you need to do so in a way that makes you more legibly feminine to the rest of us. How dare you try to lift a weight, you enormous cow, right? So it's sort of this way of like taking a more male-coded language of altering your body in these specific ways, sort of like bodybuilding, but you just do it to look more like a ballerina. And I mean, again, it's, I think, kind of like random happenstance that it ended up being Pilates. Rather, there were just a few really key figures in the Pilates movement early on. It really sort of took up primacy among women, and because like a lot of dancers and like famous celebrities were doing it, and because of how their bodies happened to look after doing Pilates, not because Pilates actually does lengthen your muscles in a meaningful way, or there's this idea of reductionism, which is like this targeted reduction, that doing a specific exercise can, eliminate fat around your thighs, around your abdomen. That's not true. Like your body just kind of will pull fat from wherever it wants to pull fat. You can't just tell it to like only lose weight around the middle. And so Pilates plays into this belief that we have that doing specific things will meaningfully shape your body in these specific ways. And that's not to say that it won't change your body. It will, just not always in the ways that it promises.
Before we get to our last question, I just want to quickly say that I have really been inspired by a more utilitarian understanding of exercise in terms of like how to do the other things that I really like to do in my life. So my other hobby other than running is dahlia farming, and it is very hard on the body. And I have like, in order to keep my back strong to do my hobby, I have to do core. And so thinking of like, okay, core as something to do, like to make it so that I can do my other hobby, instead of like I want Britney Spears's like 4-pack or whatever. Like it really is such a useful thought experiment to me of like, what exercises can I do to actually like keep my body doing the other things that I want to do? Not for what it looks like, but what it can do.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's such a useful way of looking at it, of like, again, like, would I still do this if it didn't change how I look? And instead asking yourself, like, what would actually make my life more livable, more fun, more joyful? Again, if going to Pilates makes it easier for you to garden and to go out dancing with your pals, incredible. Absolutely do that. But again, if you're just kind of trying to do it to beat your body into compliance, that's where it becomes the issue.
Okay, last question is going to give us a lot to think about. This is another big picture one. It comes from Liz.
I think the problems are like half shrink it and pink it, but don't count out misogyny. If women dress for other women, men work out for other men. So much of men's workout advice dovetails with traditional ideas about masculinity, and so much of the manosphere overlaps with workout advice. And so women's fitness splits in response online between women who work out in pursuit of traditional feminine ideals and women who work out for like a feminism adjacent prioritization of self. So my question is, who needs to change first and who needs to change more? The dudes or the ladies? If the men's fitness industrial complex could somehow divest from the patriarchy, what would shift in the women's industrial fitness complex in response?
Oh, God.
Ha ha ha. There's a good one for us to end on.
I think for me, it's like if we go way upstream of this question, what I'm seeing is that both of these anxieties, both on the masculine and the feminine side, sort of convert a systemic failure into an individual practice or a purchase. You failed this cultural norm in some key way, and therefore it is incumbent on you to change who you are so that you don't accidentally interrogate the cultural norm that made you want to do CrossFit or ballet in the first place. I think that that's the really, really big one here is that people are always you can basically just tell people what to be insecure about. For men, you will just tell them to be insecure that they are too small, that they are insufficiently productive, they are insufficiently masculine, and they don't have enough crypto. For women, it's often those sort of like tried and true traditions of feminine beauty, and then also increasingly fertility. And because capitalism's going to capitalism, we've started to bear the mantle of that productivity as well. And so all of these trends end up being a way of trying to tick all of those boxes. And so I really think that it's sort of that, like the very far upstream thing is that they are selling an aesthetic outcome dressed up as health. When you look at men and women, health outcomes should not be radically different, and a lot of the interventions that were being sold shouldn't be radically different. Therefore, when you see a huge difference in the interventions, that is primarily marketing and not science. My favorite hobby is looking at sort of the packaging on different supplements for women versus men, because as men, it's always like tactical nuclear gator juice. And then for women, it's always like sparkle puff muffin powder, and it's like extremely feminine, and like even the flavors are somehow girlier, which always feels condescending.
Like just like the protein drinks at Whole Foods, it's like the font.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, essentially, again, what we're doing is we're trying to take this sort of cultural anxiety and turn it into something that we as individuals now have to fix. And I think that the listener's right in that it is a chicken and egg, but I think taking note of wherever it feels like you are failing personally can be instructive to see is like, am I failing personally because I'm failing, or is it because I was set up to fail culturally in this specific way of there is no way that I can look like an ancient Greek goddess while also working 2 jobs, performing childcare, caretaking for a parent, and only managing to get to the Pilates class twice a week.
Yeah. Kylie, what do you think?
I mean, I feel like, not trying to blame men, but I do feel like women get a lot of pressure from men as well to look a certain way or like be a certain wife, etc. And so I'm kind of inclined to say like maybe that side of things needs to change a little bit more first. I don't know if you guys have an opinion, but
I mean, I think that like it's both and, right? And then I also think that the thing that's like, again, been running through this entire conversation is that if we lived in a less precarious society where we weren't striving and competing with one another all the time to try to like have more social capital and actual capital, and if like our system of capitalism wasn't like on steroids, which is a fitting analogy for this particular conversation, then both things would calm down a little, right? And that's not to extract, like, that's not to not say that this is also about patriarchy, but it's also about patriarchy under hypercapitalism, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's exactly the mechanism. And I think it's always interesting and instructive to pay attention to how it plays out differently because, I mean, kind of a weird place to end this conversation, but there's also a lack of research around men and eating disorders and the particular ways that these aesthetic pressures shape the lives of men. And increasingly, we're seeing that, lo and behold, it is not great for them. Patriarchy can be extremely bad for them as well, and the pressures that it puts on their bodies and on their sense of self-worth being tied to productivity as well. And so I think that, you know, the system, even though the impacts can be disproportionately spread and are always borne worst by the most vulnerable members of society, potentially we can get even more attention and bring more awareness when we're like, hey guys, this is also not great for you. Wouldn't it be nice to feel like you don't always have to look like Matt Damon from The Odyssey? Follow me into the world of feminism and fitness.
Zoe, won't someone think of the men? Like, well, no one like give any attention.
I'm so glad that someone finally had the courage to say it, that we should think of them more.
That is a great place for us to end. If people want to hear more from both of you, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find us on Your Diet Sucks at yourdietsuckspodcast.com. We're also on Instagram at Your Diet Sucks Pod, and find the podcast with that title wherever you are listening to this.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Today, paid subscribers got a bonus segment on all my favorite running gear, including the socks that I always wear, the specific brand of water vest that I have decided is the best treats for when you need to convince yourself that you can keep running until mile 16, because you'll get to have that treat then, all included. And earlier this week, paid subscribers got a bonus episode about the women in the Odyssey, and more specifically, their hair, and how Nolan created a world that had no women's armpits. It's really interesting. Stay tuned for more insights just like those. So if you want to support the show and be sure you always get all the bonus content, head to patreon.com/culturestudy. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. Also, be sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. So if you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod, or check the show notes for a link. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.